Hey loves, it's Britt, and today I wanted to do kind of a different video talking about Jupiter entering Cancer, and this year ahead we're going to have Jupiter in Cancer for approximately a year-ish is how long Jupiter stays in a sign. And we also have this amazing Mercury at 29 degrees of Gemini conjunct to Jupiter at 29 degrees of Gemini happening right now. And Mercury is actually leaving Gemini for Cancer in just like, I think, a couple hours or so. So there's a lot going on with the transits, and I don't usually do transits, but some of you guys have kind of liked my little talks about the transits, so I thought I'd do one for this Jupiter transit, which is quite a big deal, right? I mean, it's not as big as some of these slower planets, but it is still a yearly thing, and it definitely shows a lot of like where our luck will lie for the next year for all signs. And also, you know, where will be a fortunate area, or an area that will bring us joy and optimism and faith. And yeah, so we got to talk about Jupiter in Cancer and how it's in itself is a very fortunate placement, although it is kind of getting hit with some hard aspects right off the bat. So firstly, I'll just talk about, just very briefly, because we're literally in this right now, like, and it's going to end very shortly because Mercury moves so fast. But Mercury is at the 29th degree of Gemini, and so is Jupiter. And the 29th degree always signifies a sort of crisis point, right? Because the 29th degree is the final degree. It is the ending point of a sign before we move to the next sign, and then the next sign starts at 0 degrees, right? So the 29th degree always has that energy of like an ending, and it also has an energy of wisdom and being, you know, like a very old soul as far as that sign goes. But it's like, on one hand, you're like old and tired and like, you know, you've gone through so much with all the other degrees, and now you're reaching this point of like, even like exhaustion. Now, different signs have different energies in the 29th degree. Gemini's is a little bit more upbeat, but it definitely can feel like, you know, we've taken it only as far as it can go, and like there is no more for us here with this Gemini energy. So how I interpret the 29th degree Gemini, Mercury, and Jupiter meeting there, you know, Mercury is about the mind. Gemini rules Mercury, so Mercury is stronger than Jupiter in this case. So like when you're having a conjunction, right, you want to look at the planet that is stronger in that sign. Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini. It does not naturally function well there. We've just had a year of, you know, this actually not the easiest Jupiter transit, because, you know, Jupiter naturally rules Sagittarius, which is about faith and, you know, more intuition rather than logic. And, you know, that's really more of Jupiter's realm. And then, you know, we've got Jupiter and Mercury sign. So in this conjunction that we're having today, Mercury is stronger. So I feel like on the negative side, our minds could be running and running and running and ruminating and like, you know, really it can be hard to shut the mind off. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like in my meditation today, I'm just like, and I'm not at home either. I'm at a hotel, but it was like really hard to tune in, like really hard to like focus the mind, right? Like the thoughts are just jumping and jumping and jumping. But yet at the same time, it's like clarity is popping in easily, but it's like an intellectual clarity rather than like a spiritual clarity with Gemini energy being at the 29th degree. Because Gemini is like, even though it can represent like the inner child and like playfulness, ultimately it is logical. So people with a lot of Gemini placements are going to rely more on logic and reason and like the intellect rather than you know, like far off concepts or things that cannot be proven. So I feel like with this conjunction with Mercury being stronger, there's a lot of logic in the air. There's a lot of like, you know, we're thinking about the past year with like reason. Like we're not like going off into delusions. We're able to reach this point of clarity, this kind of culmination point of like everything that's happened to us in the last year, everything that we've been going through, these themes. Jupiter and Gemini, it's been about networking, it's been about, that's the gift of Jupiter and Gemini, is like it's great for, simple, lighthearted communication, networking, and like connecting with people on a more superficial level, which is sometimes needed and is sometimes like a breath of fresh air, So we're reflecting on these things, and we're coming to these understandings, these logical understandings, and we're ready to integrate all of this wisdom, and we're ready to move on to the next phase. I do feel like one of the negative sides of the 29th degree of Gemini is kind of like the rat race, right? Like we've done so much movement. We're ready to like I said, like calm the mind and like shut up the monkey mind, like, just needing to find that center point, that balanced energy. So yeah, it does feel though like this energy of Mercury conjunct Jupiter and Gemini is like, so like you've just finished like college or university, and you're now thinking about these years, and like it's been like, well, in this case it's just been 1 year because we've just had Jupiter and Gemini for 1 year, but like you're looking back on it and like all that you've learned from a practical, like logical sense, and then like all that you've learned from like the wisdom of just being in this experience. You're kind of like integrating that, and the conjunction is like a point of rebirth and new beginning, and like this really feels like it's like logic meets faith, and you can really decide in this moment. Like I actually think this is an excellent moment, this finale, this final degree, to really just like get clear on where you want to go in this next year, and like with gratitude of what you've been accomplishing in this past year, which we rarely get an aspect like this on the last day of like a sign placement. Like this is actually quite significant, that like it's kind of like a kiss goodbye to Jupiter and Gemini, which we won't see for another 12 years or 13 years. And it seems like a really good integration point to move on to the next part here. So that's just kind of a little bit of brief, like what I feel about this conjunction. But now we're having Mercury moving into Cancer. It won't stay in Cancer very long. Mercury's very quick when it's not retrograding, right? So we'll have that for a few weeks where our minds will be more emotional. It'll be, we'll be more fluctuating in the currents of life, rather than with Mercury and Gemini, we're operating from a more logical point of view, and, we're maybe quicker, but Mercury and Cancer is much more intuitive. We're able to see what's being said under the surface, without hearing people say it. And then Jupiter moving into Cancer is the big one that we have to talk about, because this is going to be for the next year-ish. I don't have the exact dates, but yeah, it's a big one. So Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, meaning that traditional astrologers actually said that Jupiter functions in its highest and best way in Cancer. So this is an especially lucky placement, and like I said, Jupiter in Gemini is the detriment. So I think that we will just, even in that, see a positive shift. With Jupiter entering Cancer, there's a real like comfy, cozy feeling with Jupiter in Cancer. We want to nurture ourselves and others, and we want to stay close to home, but we're like building this inner sanctuary within, and like it is an emotional placement. And I think this is why, even in its exaltation, for some people it's difficult, because we do have to tend to that inner garden of how we personally feel. And we can't, shove our hurts down and like our feelings down anymore and like process them logically. We have to allow ourselves to feel, and it is kind of a feminine transit. So it's favorable for femininity in all forms. I think many astrologers are saying that like, women are going to get pregnant during this transit or whatever. And I think that's like a pretty vast way to describe this. But like, in one sense, Cancer does rule over women and like the feminine monthly cycle and the cycle of birth, right? And pregnancy and birth. And so all of these things can be themes. Now, you don't actually have to give birth to a child to experience that cycle, right? There's a cyclical nature in, creating a project or, like a business plan, or like, it doesn't have to be directly related to children, although it definitely can. And, there's going to be a focus on family. There's going to be a focus on the home front and home improvements, buying a new house, selling property, things like that are the more practical aspects that could be focused on in this next year. But yeah, it is a real comfy, cozy energy. You are going to be sentimental. You're probably going to be, kind of nostalgic, like pondering the past more, and, less inclined to move around and flit about and communicate with all certain different types of people, unless it's activating a very social point in your chart. It is a more inward energy, and it's very interesting because Jupiter, naturally rules Sagittarius. So to me, I feel like Jupiter in Cancer being exalted is very interesting. That, there's even a different side of Jupiter that we get to access, this more feminine energy of Jupiter, and it's going to be a really beautiful time, I think. But we do have to talk about these harsh aspects that it's making right off the get-go. So it's making a square to Saturn right away. Now, Jupiter's been squaring Saturn kind of all year. Like, even the first one happened in like August of last year, with Saturn still in Pisces and Jupiter was in Gemini still, right? And now when Jupiter goes into Cancer right away, because we've got Saturn in the early degrees of Aries, we're going to see Jupiter squaring Saturn. I think this is the final time. This is on June 15th. So Jupiter squaring Saturn is kind of like a crisis of faith. It's probably one of the more difficult aspects that you can have in your natal chart, for sure. But in transits, it's quite realistic to think that many people have had a really tough year with this Jupiter squaring Saturn energy, and we're getting, one last taste of this, but it's happening in these very early degrees. So that to me suggests that this new beginning energy of Jupiter being in Cancer newly, Saturn being in Aries newly, is kind of coming off to a little bit of a rough start, and we're going to have some plans maybe not go to plan. And Jupiter squaring Saturn, I think I've even read, like, Jupiter squaring or opposing Saturn is like a suicide aspect, like in the natal chart. Like, it's depressing because we have our faith, Jupiter, being tested with Saturn, the planet of karma, restrictions, pessimism. So we've got two opposing energies squaring off, and really what is the most difficult aspect, right? The aspect of frustration and tension. So if this middle of June period is a little rough, and you've got some disappointments or financial losses, or because Jupiter's newly in Cancer, something related to the home comes up that is a little bit disappointing, or very disappointing perhaps, that is probably in line. But the thing also about the square aspect is you sure get a lot done, more than with the easier aspects in some cases. Because of this frustration point that's happening, it's like you could be more motivated to clean up your house. You could be more motivated to get the project done, or like get your finances in order, or, serious business happens with the Jupiter-Saturn square. So even though it is essentially a difficult or depressing aspect, and you can definitely feel like you're up against these like unimaginable odds that you cannot break through. There's like this concrete wall, and you just like can't get to your goal. It will pass, and it definitely is a test of inner strength, and it is actually a cause for building inner strength, because to face off with that square energy, you have to really go within. You're not going to get the result from outside of you. You're going to have to build up the inner strength to push through this. And so I think that's the first test that we're relating to. And so it's going to be Cancer, Jupiter, so it's all about the family, the home, the inner feelings, and Saturn in Aries, which is going to be all about individuality and like the self, right? So I think you could have a bit of like a self-worth thing come up right now, or an issue of like someone around the home or family taking issue with your self-expression, and you might have to stand up and say, this is me and this is who I am, and like screw you or something, right? Saturn in Aries is quite the transit so far. It's very fiery, and I feel quite a burst of like fighting warrior energy like coming out, which is really interesting, and I did not expect this actually. It could be because I just had my Mars return too, though. So one last aspect I want to talk about is really shortly after Jupiter square Saturn, Jupiter square Neptune, because Saturn and Neptune are conjunct right now in Aries. So this is like totally new, uncharted territory. With Jupiter squaring Neptune, I would really put off making major decisions right now. And I don't usually I don't like to be that astrologer, right? But like Jupiter squaring Neptune is so confusing, and like the biggest thing is like, don't jump ship on what you believe. Like, don't like give up your long time spiritual belief to hop on a different bandwagon, because the problem with Jupiter square Neptune is like, nothing is what it seems as far as like beliefs and spirituality and religion and faith, right? So like it's a very elusive energy, and you also want to be aware of like people trying to sell you stuff, like getting scammed, right? You just want to be extra careful right now. It's not like a Mercury retrograde or energy, but it's like a crisis of faith also, and I think we just want to be a little bit, and this like, not to be in fear or anything, but like honoring your inner truth. Not letting anybody else pull you into any, weird schemes or plans or anything like that. And just don't make any drastic changes to your like beliefs or even your home life right now, I would say. Because things might not be what they seem. Now, on the positive side of Jupiter and Neptune facing off in a square, our spirituality is going to be really heightened. Like, I think some people are going to really see God right now, and especially with Jupiter exalted, this is going to be like the veil is thin energy. But I also think as many people are going to see God, if people are ungrounded, they might see something, think it's God, and it's not really God. So just have those spiritual boundaries up, do your energy shielding practices, and you'll be good. But it's off to a little bit of a rocky start with Jupiter in Cancer, but overall, I think it's going to be a really soothing energy that we need right now. And it's going to be a fortunate time for many, and a time of really going within and seeing what's there within you. We've had a lot of action, we've had a lot of movement, we've had a lot of short trips, we've had a lot of study without synthesis or integration potentially with Jupiter and Gemini, and now we're going to really have the time to embody all that we've learned on an emotional level, which is going to bring us fortune and blessings around the home, and blessings for the heart, and maybe children for some, or children in the form of a creative project for others as well. So I'd love to know how you guys are feeling with these transits, or what you're interpreting about it. That was kind of my feel for it. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as well in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. Talk soon. Bye.